I'm Thomas. I'm Francois' oldest son. It's funny, the last time Francois and I were in here, and I wish I could remember his name, we were interviewing the head of the Sierra Club, who was head of the Sierra Club in the 60s. Ring a bell to anybody? I don't at the moment. It was so long ago. But we had a room scheduled in the alumni house, and they kicked us out. They gave it to KCGL or somebody like that. We were like, damn. So here we are with this guy. We have all our gear. So we went out back, and the football field by there, and there was all these great big blue spruce trees, and we did an interview that was way nicer. So it was kind of nice to start that way. I put some jelly beans out there because that's a thing that Francois and I connected on a lot at the end. We used to connect with cigarettes and then later jelly beans. So anyway, I'm going to read a short story. One of my favorite stories of my dad's. I'm big into surrealism, and this is probably the most surreal thing that Francois has written. So it started from a one-page story called Baby, 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 which won a contest in Florida. Basically, it was an anonymous in the entry, so one-page story, anonymous entry, and he won. He won $1,000 and a crate of bad oranges, I guess, right? So then this story was expanded from there. So the story is called In the Sewers of Salt Lake. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. All right. Baby, 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 let's taste each other's bodies now without pleasure, Martha says. The living room is full of dogs. She has 3, I have 4. They have no names. We just call them all dog, and they never fail to understand which one we mean. It's early evening, and the young men from the gas company are lined up in the streets outside singing a Jerry Lee Lewis medley. They've got the grand piano strapped on the back of a flatbed truck, parked under the maple trees. They sing like fallen angels, breathless, great balls of fire. Hang up my rock and roll shoes. Touch me here, Martha says. Touch me there now. High school confidential, there's a whole lot of shaking going on. They're all castrati, of course, with those thin, high, pure voices that specify otherness and absence. Baby, 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 Martha says. I accuse her of bad faith. You were the one that said without pleasure. It came over me like a big wind, Martha apologizes. She looks skeletal without her clothes on, ribs like an anatomy lesson. God, I love her, but what can I do? This morning I made fajitas. She picked out all the bits of chicken, sailed her tortillas like frisbees to the grateful dogs, toyed with a piece of green pepper, and satisfied herself with slivers of onion. Tomorrow afternoon, it's supposed to be the Utah Power and Light people doing Janis Joplin. Big women in meter reader uniforms singing the blues. On the far side of the room, under the moiling dogs, the twins are playing. One says mama, the other says mama, mama. Gustav Flaubert. Martha is reading L'Education Sentimentale aloud to me in the wavering light of a candle. Frederick, she says, Madame Arnaud Frederick. The utility people came yesterday in their gray and green uniforms with their silver skull and crossbones on the collars and shut off all the electricity, the water, the heat. We're lying on the floor under the dogs. The twins are crawling around inside a sleeping bag, 2 movable bumps, whining softly. Martha looks up from the book. We are folds in the consciousness of our time, she says. Any other way of looking at it is petite bourgeois sentimentality. Read, I say. How can we believe in realism in the novel anymore, she asks me. Read, I tell her. The astonishing possibility of love. The dogs have dug a complicated system of tunnels in the backyard. They hide during the day in the cool underground and pop up at unpredictable intervals like small, hairy Viet Cong. This morning, the twins disappeared in the labyrinth, and Martha put on her camouflage fatigues and went down after them. It's been 3 hours now, and I'm still waiting for her to return. There's a light rain falling all over Utah, and the state is damp and almost uninhabitable. Martha took the rechargeable flashlight and a box of Ritz in case she had to stay past lunchtime. Mishka and Mishka, the twins, have always loved to explore dark places. I'm sure they'll be all right. What could happen to them down under the backyard? The dogs will look after them until Martha arrives with her flashlight and crackers. I'm not worried. To pass the time, I dial the 900 number for women's confessions. I'm surprised to hear that my first ex-wife's voice, made mysterious and foreign by the long-distance connection, I had an affair with the telephone repairman, she says. He was small, ugly, dark, and Greek. He sang Frank Sinatra ballads in my ear while we made love under the kitchen table. The best part of his body was his feet. They were hairy all over and so very soft. I look out the window to see Martha coming out of the tunnel entrance under the gooseberry bushes. She's crawling on all fours, carrying Mishka in her teeth by the back of his overalls. Where's Mishka, I say. The dogs are bringing him up, she says. Do you know they've carved out little rooms down there with tiny beds and candlesticks made out of empty sea ration cans? It's quite comfortable and warm, not at all what I expected. The fractal edge of the edge, which resembles only itself. My sister calls from Fairbanks, where it's the middle of the night and cold enough, she says, to make the tires on her car go flat before morning. The molecules move too slowly to keep the necessary pressure, she says. She asked me if I can remember the dog I had when I was a child. Charmant, I told her. Our sentences cut across each other, thrown out of kilter by the time it takes her voice to travel up to the satellite and bounce down the impossible geodesics of space to me. A quarter of a second at the speed of light. Charmant, she says. We didn't have electricity in those days, I said, or running water. It was during the war and we had to make do with small pleasures. Isn't there any way I could make it up to you, my sister says. I've got 4 dogs now, 7 if you count Martha's, but it isn't the same, I say. It never could be the same, my sister says. In the sewers of Salt Lake. At the entrance, which is in the basement of the county courthouse, a sign forbids the public to pick up anything they might find and take it home. The corporation guides wear their dress uniforms, but instead of the billed caps, they have on miners' helmets with powerful carbide lamps. Martha carries Mishka in a sling tucked against her belly. I carry Mishka in a backpack. Mama, Mishka says. Mama, mama, the other Mishka answers. Not even Martha knows which is which. In fact, the question makes no sense since they're exactly identical. The compulsory guided tour is given once a year to citizens chosen by a lot from the voter registration rolls. We are happy to be here, though we wish they had allowed us to leave the babies at home. Martha reads to me from the leaflet. Various nocturnal animals may be encountered in the tunnels and must be on no account be fed or petted or disturbed in any manner. Remember at all times that you are walking through an environment of extreme ecological fragility. The guides walk close to us with nightsticks in case we become unruly or recalcitrant. The one nearest Martha is very young. His uniform looks too big and he seems ashamed of his military appearance. He frowns when Martha stumbles and pushes her back in line, but not unkindly. The chief guide holds up his hand to bring us to a halt. We are in the Baptist catacombs under what is now Sears and Roebuck. Luminous skulls are set in niches all along the walls, staring at us from the holes which were once their eyes. Loose pieces of dead Baptists have fallen from their resting places and are scattered underfoot. The small finger bones crack like twigs when we step on them. We arrive at the temple in time to experience from beneath the ritual emptying of the baptismal fonts. The rush of holy water howling through the golden pipes startles the twin and they begin to cry until Martha gives them a suck, one on each breast. A crocodile drifts slowly down the stream, only a few feet away, eyes and nostrils barely above the dark waters. A woman in a calico dress throws him a slice of Wonder Bread, and the guards strike her down savagely with their sticks, softly at first, but with increasing fervor. We sing old Eric Clapton songs, After Midnight, Layla, Bell Bottom Blues. Thank you.
I have my fancy reading glasses. I'm going to read Francois' Obituary that was written in Mapping Literary Utah, but I've added a few things to it. So Francois Andre Camoin was born in Nice, France in 1939 on June 20th. It was his birthday 2 days ago. One of his earliest memories was being handed over the border from unoccupied to occupied France. He was about 2 and was carried from one SS soldier to the next until soldier, there we go, until he reached his grandmother. There was food in occupied France, you see, especially turnips. Turnips were one of Francois' comfort foods. You could depend on turnips, he'd say. Francois' mother, Catherine, worked for the resistance. There are a lot of great stories floating around about Catherine, most of which I would botch, but consider this. She read Proust and other French writers to Francois when he was very young. From an early age, language was important to Francois, and Catherine passed that on. He spent his early years reading forbidden continental classics in his grandmother's basement before moving to England with his mother and stepfather, and they immigrated to the U.S. in 1951. Some of you might know that Francois' first love was photography. There are 8,000 photos on his computer, and that's not counting negatives and slides. He wanted to go to school to study photography, but his stepfather felt that that was frivolous. He first went to college on a physics scholarship, failed out, joined the army, got married, became a father. About this time he started writing, and years later he found a place for his photography, not long after we married. Francois was by nature curious, resourceful, and unafraid. When asked once how he learned to build a house, he built two, he said, with a book in one hand and a hammer in the other. Francois received his BA in English in 1964 and an MA in English in 1965. I want you to think about that. 1 year for an MA. And then a PhD in the Jacobean drama at the University of Massachusetts in 1967, so 2 years for his doctorate. When he decided he wanted to do something, he did it. He started his teaching career at Slippery Rock State College and Denison University. He became an assistant professor of English at the University of Utah in 1977, an associate professor in 1983, and a full professor in 1987, teaching creative writing, modern literature, and intellectual traditions of the West. He was by nature curious, resourceful, and unafraid. I asked him once, Francois won the Flannery O'Connor Award for short fiction in 1985 and an A grant. He was one of the founders of Writers at Work, a Utah writing conference in Park City. In 1995, he was recognized with the Salt Lake City Mayor's Artist Award, and in 2004, he won the Utah Humanities Council grant. His works include over 80 published short stories, the collections April, May, and So On, Like Love But Not Exactly, Why Men Are Afraid of Women, The End of the World is Los Angeles, and the novels Bimbo in Paradise and Deadly Virtues. His memoir, Some of These Days You're Going to Miss Me, Honey, is forthcoming. The writer Steve Allman called Francois Camoin a literary giant, describing his prose as fearless, exalted, precise, in his rendering of absurd comic moments within tragic circumstances. Francois spent a lifetime in the arts, inspiring students to learn, to lean into those arts for solace, for love, for intellectual satiation, and for a conversation with literature itself. His students, in whom he inspired a passionate curiosity and interest in craft, will remember him always as the man who transformed them and who gave them questions to live by. Francois-André Camoin died on March 18, 2019, surrounded by family and friends, full of gratitude for a life well lived, as he had often said he hoped he would. Okay.
I'm Francois' granddaughter, Matisse Camoin. I have a poem and a few words to share with you guys today. One of these days, you'll disappear with a final word I'll never hear. Gone but never forgotten, lost and longingly lingering. I carry you with me in my heart, in my soul, in my blood, and in a small wooden ring box. I take you with on adventures. I take you with on adventures you've probably been on before, long after you've waltzed out through that heavy iron door. In my deepest slumber, in my sweetest dreams, we meet again for long walks through barren deserts, but in your company the forest always seems so full. Until I wake and feel that ache, the one that forever pulls me far away from the mundane, the soulless, and the otherwise dull. I itch to scribble down scraps of my soul I need to write the same way that I need to breathe. I imagine this was true for my grandfather as well. And I'll never forget the long talks between adults as I scurried about his house on M Street, rediscovering every room, nook and cranny, just like my son here. I recall staring for what seemed like hours at paintings of white houses with red rooftops and fields of poppies that jumped right out at you. And I will always remember the warm embrace and the kiss on the cheek as I bid him goodbye. Come on, buddy. Thank you, everyone.
Hi, I'm Shane. I'm going to be reading a few excerpts from Francois' Memoir, the first chapter. It's the first time I've read my dad's work, so forgive me if I'm a bit verklempt as I get through it. Thank you. You start writing a book by saying I, and by saying now, and by saying here, and already before you begin, you're defeated. Now is always some other time, and here is without exception elsewhere. And what about this I who claims to be speaking? His name is Legion, successfully fragmented, dispersed, disseminated, discarded. Descartes' cogito is no proof that we exist, just as the calculus is not a serious answer to Zeno's paradox. We will forever still have half the distance to travel before we arrive. The story is told that Morris Cohen's student asked the philosopher, "How do I know that I exist?" Morris, I picture him in black robes behind a mahogany podium, a monumental figure. He said, "And who then is asking the question?" A Norman Rockwell painting, that little scene, the smart-ass student hangs his head in shame, his peers snicker. After school, they'll beat him up. It could have been a Saturday Evening Post cover. The classroom is classic colors, the simplified American faces, light beaming in through the high windows, and the interlude is over before it really begins. The fabric of space is mended. The great clock of the Enlightenment almost stopped, but Morris gave it a little tap, and it was on the move again, ticking and talking. The great wheels, gears, estimates, the mechanical spirits of the world resumed their planetary motions. But Morris was teaching a dull class. A smarter student would have replied, "That's the trouble, you see. In fact, I have no idea who's asking." I'm not arguing with Professor Cohen here. Pressed hard enough by circumstance or anxiety, we are all victims of Descartes. Me too. We know we deserve certitude, a place to begin, a concrete foundation for the erection of our cherished selves. We're fascinated by beginnings and ends, the source of the Nile, the first European to walk the shore of the Great Salt Lake, the instant of conception when, Simone de Beauvoir tells us, the sperm is castrated and the conquering ovum becomes me, or you, or Morris Cohen. We want to know the moment of the Big Bang, that was the beginning of the beginning, the precise place, the exact instant when the big God clock started to tick, 0 hour. Nothing comes from nothing, Lucretius says, and we agree. At the same time, we insist on that before, which transforms the present moment into an after, a consequence. I have lived here now for more than 20 years in the same house in the suburbs of Salt Lake City, a more or less American town perched on another invisible and shifting line that divides our idea of desert from our idea of mountains. There are other borders to take into account. My house is just about on top of the Wasatch Fault, which hasn't moved for 500 years and is overdue for a great earthquake. When natural forces will do to Salt Lake City what we did to Hiroshima on the early morning of August 6th, 1945. A bright white light filled the plain, Colonel Paul Tibbets said. Oppenheimer's gorgeous mathematical abstraction made itself manifest exactly as planned, appeared 1,900 feet above the city, hereto left, untouched by the Air Force. Untouched because the idea was to end the war by impressing the Japanese, sure, but also our leaders wanted to test the bomb on a virgin target, where the extent of damage, the efficiency of the equation could be more easily measured. Hiroshima, Nagasaki were preserved by the Air Force, off limits to the B-29s and their incendiary loads. I'm 65 years old. Occasionally I think about Zeno's paradox and tell myself that before I die, I first have to live half the time between now and the hour of my death. Hail Mary, Mother of God, pray for us now. And how difficult it is to leave behind the language of church and childhood. And then half the time between that moment and the end, and therefore I've never actually arrived at the great terminus, the last stop on the line. For the same reason, the great earthquake will never happen. The waters won't run dry, and the fabulous towers of the great American desert won't crumble into dust. We'll always have Las Vegas, Salt Lake City, Phoenix, Tucson, Palm Springs, Barstow, and Bakersfield. They're a comfort, those old Greeks, if you can hang tight to their abstractions, less fatal than those of Teller and Oppenheimer, if you can hang on for the fragile chains of reasoning they built for us, the rhapsody of logic that enchanted Descartes and charmed Pascal the gambler. Out is where I am, where I've always been, where I plan to stay for the duration, separate from myself, from myselves, if I can believe my once beloved analyst, who thought I suffered from dissociative ego states. Someone told me she has taken up channeling spirits for the long dead past, which makes me doubt the whole therapy experience in a retroactive but nevertheless poignant manner. It's like learning that your parish priest has become a Scientologist. Unsettling. Makes you rethink all those dusty afternoons in the confessional when you spilled your secrets, where you created yourself out of your shame. Still, after the fall of my analyst, which might after all be only a rumor, I might have to go on. Prozac, Xanax, a couple of glasses of cheap red wine in the late afternoon help me maintain a necessary distance from myself, a professional distance, you might say. Without which, how can I diagnose this disease, let alone perform the complicated ideological reconstructive surgeries that keep me going? However, all this Brechtian fussing is futile. I have a fool for a patient no matter where I stand. For a long time, I wrote stories, minimalist and precise, every word picked out, turned over, examined like a rare pebble before I put it in the exact spot with poetry tweezers. I sat in my room on M Street, a failed Flaubert, hypnotized by the idea of the sentence, paralyzed in my search for le mot juste, lost in the province, more provincial than any he could have dreamed of. Migraines on the couch, agonies over the shape and heft of a paragraph, the unpredictable fall of a phrase. I worried the language like a dog with a bone. Finally, I lost interest. I was raised by my grandmother, a sad Catholic woman. There are two familial histories to account for my departure from home. One is that my father couldn't stand the competition, that he told my mother to choose between the two of us. The other is that my mother feared the tuberculosis and knew I'd find better food on a farm in the occupied zone. You want to know which version is true? So do I, for a long time. Now it's not important. Probably neither and both. Still, the story starts the same way it will end, with this doubt, this fundamental uncertainty, which leaves dumb, unspoken traces everywhere in the narrative, smears of probability precisely where we desire more than anything else to be certain. But it won't happen. We can cry, tell me, until we only croak, and all we've done is put an end to speech. What I do remember clearly is being handed over a border crossing, cocooned in a baby blanket, passed from hand to hand, over the traditional red and white striped pole that could be raised to let automobiles, carts, and horses through. It would have been a year, maybe less. The scene, vivid, numinous, might be a true memory, the earliest thing I can remember. Or it could be something I was told later and I have inserted into the internal narrative of myself. And what the hell difference does that make? Everybody who could testify to the facts is dead. Ideas and memories tumble and collide without respect for order or meaning or consequence. Pulled together for a moment of juxtaposition by some strange attractor, they caper for the camera like tourists. Somebody who is not me is taking the picture. I'm watching myself happen. Some days it's interesting, this turmoil, the clatter and cry of living. Other days it's a reason for unhappiness. Still, you keep on. Work, for the night cometh when no man can work, says Samuel Johnson. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Robert Berge, and I started as a student of Francois, but he was a lot of other things to me, and I just want to say thanks for having me here. And I wanted to mention that Daryl Spencer very much wanted to be here, and he's had some health issues and he couldn't make it, but he really wanted to pass along that he wanted to be in this room. And Spence is kind of a way to dovetail into Francois. Francois was teaching at the University of Vermont at a low residency where I was a student. And he had started as a guest author, and I'll get back to the beginning of that, but he had been a professor there for about a year, and I hadn't gotten to work with him, but we'd really hit it off and hung around. And Daryl was going to be a guest at the program, and he said, "Oh, you'll love Spence. You two are going to hit it off." And Daryl and I both called Francois Dad to each other. And when he had first come to the school, I was on my third grad program and thinking, this is not for me. You know, I dropped out of 2, and like, why am I spending the money? Like, I don't fit, and they're not going to make me fit. And Francois was a guest writer at Vermont, and he came out and he read American literature, a story in, I believe, Like Love, but not exactly. And for me, it was like the first time I'd ever heard music that was a revolution to me, that I wasn't alone, and that someone knew how to do what I wanted to do. It was the first time I'd ever been to a reading where I thought, wow, that guy writes stories that I want to write. Maybe he can tell me how. And at first I didn't get to work with him, but it was a way I think the head of our department kept me in the program. Because I was like, I'm going to work with that guy or I'm going to quit. And it came to my seniority where they give you who you want your last semester. And I finally got to work with Francois. And, you know, Bellows said that a writer is a reader moved to emulation. And I've been lucky enough to teach for almost 30 years now. And I found that what I do is I was a student moved to emulation, and it was emulation of Francois. I'd never met anyone like him. The intelligence, the quick wit, the fun. As Daryl said, like when we first met, it's like, one thing I love about Francois is that he's got that French thing that he can shrug 47 different ways. And he was the greatest shrugger I ever met. But, you know, I don't want to go on about too much of my history, but there are very few people in my life, and he's in a class of the inner circle, who affected my path so much. I would not be anywhere near where I am without Francois. At first, he was like a father figure to me, and we worked together, and he became, you know, a friend and a colleague, and he always made me feel that way. And I just want to do this is a quick thing, because I've never said this to Shelley, and I found out about it years after it happened. Francois wanted to have me out after we'd worked together. He was generous enough to keep reading my work, which as a professor, it's like, I did not realize what a rude thing I was asking him to do. But he called me and said I'd gotten a scholarship to Writers at Work. Do you remember this? And it turned out he just wanted to introduce me to a couple of editors, and that he thought it would benefit my life and career, which it very much did. And I got there and I found out that another writer had actually won the scholarship, and Francois and Shelley had brought me there essentially by themselves. And that was one thing about Francois that it was absolutely hard not to love, was he took in strays. And at the time I was very much one. And like I said, I don't know anyone, a friend, who's changed my life that much where none of it is anything but positive. Like, it's an astonishing thing. And you know, there was a Mother Teresa quote of "What did you want in this life?" And it was and Francois actually changed this. He said there was no meaning to life, but there was a purpose. to love and be loved, which is a beautiful thing. And I also, I was also a sucker for the no meaning in life thing because he was fun like that. But, I think Francois taught me how to write. And, I was a reader moved to emulation, but he was also a friend like none I've ever had. And I think to be loved and to love is perhaps the only thing close to perfection in this world. And so, and as friends, I think we teach each other, and as humans, ways to love each other that we didn't know, whether our source family didn't have it or we just haven't experienced it. And he taught me a lot about how to love more expansively and more sharply than I had ever known. And when he was sick, very close to the end, and I was lucky to come out the week before, Shelley had said he's talking to angels, which I think he would have said during his life, how do you know I'm not? But I was forewarned that he might not be that lucid. And I wanted him to meet my wife because he was such an important part of my life and she wasn't there then. And we got lucky. He would have been himself no matter what he was, but he was himself, the whole weekend. And Shelley was nice enough to take everyone out so that we could have some alone time. And I helped him to the bathroom and I was helping him get up and he looked at my face and I don't have a poker face, and he said, it's all right. It's all right. I'm happy. I got to do everything I wanted to do. So he influenced me in every way, but he also was teaching me how to die. And that was a beautiful thing. And, I'm going to wrap. I don't want it to be too long, but he was just one of the most remarkable presences I've ever been in the same room with, in the same letters with, in the same emails with. And it was one of the greatest friendships of my life. And none were bigger or better. It compares with a few of the other great ones. And I don't want to go on a whole lot, but really, he was a gift in my life, and that he accepted me, and that he helped me, and that he would bring me to writers at work because he thought I should be believed in, and he believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. And, that's something beautiful too, as I discovered how nice he was, 20 years after it happened. It's like, hold it. Barry Udall won the scholarship. This doesn't add up. So I'm grateful forever that we had that weekend. I would have been grateful anyway, but Gina got to meet Francois, and he got to meet her. And one of the last things he said to me was, I'm happy you're going to be all right. And I just have never met anyone like him, and I will miss him forever, but I still hear his voice in my head. So thank you so much.
This is a little fragmented because I have a hard time writing about things that are very close to me. So bear with me. One day, I was still an undergrad. The short story after the current workshop I was taking from Francois was truly hideous. It was manipulative at best, and I knew I'd seen it before, but I couldn't place it. I was walking to class and I bumped into Francois and he said, what did you think of the story? I said, it's frighteningly horrible, and I'm pretty sure it's plagiarized. And I said, I'm glad though. And he said, why the hell are you glad? And I said, I want to see how a professor deals with a story like this, because if I'm ever to teach, I need to know how. And he said, watch and learn. And we walked into class and I sat down. Some of you know this story. Francois said, let's do so-and-so's story first and get it out of the way. And I thought, oh, he's going to eviscerate, right? I thought, great, here it comes. And then he looked at me and said, Shelley, why don't you start us off? Watch and learn indeed. And I said, is that why you sometimes open it up to other people first? He never answered that question. I first met Francois when I was an undergrad in the English department, obviously, at the University of Utah, working on a minor in creative writing. I heard rumors that he was really tough in workshops, and so I avoided him for 2 years. I decided to risk his class, and I ran into him in the English department office a few days later. He was leaning on the receptionist's desk, looking at what I assumed was a short story, but he looked up, saw me, and sort of wrote me off, I could tell. So I said quickly, Professor Camoin, I'm taking a class from you this next quarter. And he looked at me inside and he said, okay. He was the director of creative writing and had a good-sized office off the reception area, and it had his name on the door. And everyone I know pronounced his last name Camoin, including me, until one day years later, Thomas, I think, and possibly Shane too, asked that we, and David. The brothers were like, it's French. No one can pronounce it anyways, let's pronounce it the French way. And so from then on to the family, at least, we were Camoins. The workshop was as hard as those rumors said it would be. He was not cruel, which surprised me because of the rumors. But he focused on turning at least some of us into writers. He held forth. Those of you who took classes from him know what I mean. He told me once that when he first became a professor, he watched Jimmy Swaggart and other TV preachers and worked on imitating the best bits, hoping he might keep his students' attention. And if you've ever seen him pace, you know, when he was teaching, he would suddenly get up and pace. And cruel? No, but sometimes he really leaned on someone and asked the student not what happens next, but what word comes next. Occasionally, this was punctuated with a bit of French, a shrug, a wave of his hand that managed to not be dismissing. I wrote a story called The Earthquake Happens Now about an earthquake in southern New Mexico where they don't have earthquakes, but that was not the point. Francois said, I think it's all a bit blurry, but this bit about the place with rocks, is that right? It's interesting. And that was it. Not any real feedback. I was disappointed and relieved at the same time. The second story I submitted was about a woman who didn't care for a man who liked her. It was really, really original. When it was my turn to be workshopped, Francois said, turn to page 8 and read a line. Now this is interesting, he said. And I was silently cursing. There was that word interesting, which I meant kind of horrible. But he looked at me and said, I like this line, but after it, you start to explain why they can't get together in any real way. Explanations are boring. So, and here it comes. What word comes next? I had no idea what he wanted from us writers, but I did the only thing I could do except drop the class. I paid attention to the way he critiqued others, made notes about line edits, tried to understand why this story was stronger than that one, if you will. The class was small, so we each workshopped 3 stories, and the last one I turned in was about the desert called The Desert. I had written it in another workshop, but I decided to rework it and hoped Francois would think it was good or maybe not too bad. I worked on that story, anguished over a word here or there. This is not right, but what is? I tapped out the rhythm of the last sentence and changed it up a bit. In workshop, Francois said, you've made a real jump forward. And then he pointed out many things in the story, why this part worked, how this sentence could be stronger, and I thought, oh hell, I didn't think it was glorious. I kept taking his workshops, and somewhere along the line, we became good friends. Excuse me. In 1989, I was accepted into the BA to PhD program in fiction at the U, and I had just ended my first marriage. I went to a party for a grad student at someone's house. The weekend before classes started, and words had gotten out that I was newly single. People were kind and said all the right things. I was sitting in an alcove off the living room when I heard the door open and someone yelled, here comes trouble. Francois walked into the living room, headed for the kitchen, I think, And as he passed the alcove, he looked over at me and our eyes met. And he kept walking. And I swear on my life, I did not have any previous designs on the man. But right then it was like the proverbial lightning strike. Oh Lord, no, I thought, anyone but him. He was my friend, but he was also a bad risk, married 3 times before. But I knew. Later I would ask Francois when he knew, and he said that night at so-and-so's house, we knew. He was also coming off a relationship that didn't work out. To say we were both on the rebound is an understatement, but see, here's the thing. We took to the tune of 29 years. If you count the year before we married, and I do, I count it all. The last 9 years or so of his life were full of infusions and trial medications. Francois was, after having over 75 small strokes and 1 larger stroke, diagnosed with chronic eosinophilic leukemia. He would not have lived long, 4 to 7 months, the literature said. But his doctor managed to get him on a trial med that brought him extra time. However, before the trial, during the search for medication that would treat the leukemia, he was put on interferon A. And a very rare side effect of that drug can be Parkinson's. And it was Parkinson's, not the leukemia, that did Francois in. In the end, he was ready to go. I asked him, he was unafraid. I asked him the day before he died if he wanted a priest. I know that seems ridiculous, but hear me out. He asked me to check. He said, my early Catholic indoctrination might kick in about 2 weeks earlier. But when I asked, he shook his head slightly and said no. I asked him if he was afraid, and he smiled. He was at peace, and that helps. I find it hard to write about Francois partly because of those last sad years, but I think there's more to it than that. I've always had a hard time writing about things I love, and I love Francois dearly. I used to sit up at night after he'd gone to sleep and think, how am I here? How did this happen? And unlike other relationships I had, this wasn't a bad thing, being there with him, watching him sleep. He was unfailingly kind to me 99% of the time, and only very rare glimpses of grumpiness. I remember when I was struggling with my feelings for him and worrying about the sort of things you worry about when you're in a relationship with someone who is 19 years older than you are. Will I be a young widow? Just how long will we be together? In the middle of all this, my father told me, if you have 5 good years with him, that's more than most people ever get. I said, I know. My dad asked, do you love him enough? And I realized that if, say, I had walked away right then, been afraid to take the chance, someday I would hear that he was gone and I would not have been there. And just imagining that killed me. I knew then that I had to stay with him. We decided early on that our relationship and marriage was it. If there was a problem, we hashed it out. It's a cliche, but we only went to bed angry a couple of times in all those years, and you'd best believe we hashed things out in the morning. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. We read our work to each other. That's how I heard his memoir for the first time. And we would talk for hours, and I mean hours, 4 to 5 on average, when there was nothing to do or when one of us was stuck on a piece and needed help or encouragement. And even though there was 19 years between our ages, he never once one-upped me. He valued my work over his own. I still can't wrap my mind around that. I miss those talks more than anything else. I miss him still 5 years later, perhaps more now. Grief is the price we pay for love. It's dark, debilitating. It's a sliver under your thumbnail, throbbing. And my grief over Francois is so odd, chaotic. I'm glad he's no longer suffering. I feel guilty for thinking that. I'm angry that we had 9 years stolen by a wretched disease. But still, knowing the pain I feel now, one that I have at best become accustomed to, I would do it again without hesitation for Francois. Francois used to say, all I want to do is make you happy. And he worked hard at doing that and succeeded. I see myself as very fortunate, as we all are, those of us who are lucky enough to have Francois in our lives. The outpouring from friends, colleagues, and students has been incredible. I have been overwhelmed by the kind things people have said. There's one comment that has stayed with me, however, for many years. For many years, his teaching partner at Vermont was Diane Leffer. Upon hearing the news, Diane said, "It's as if a planet has left the solar system." Yes, it was and is exactly like that. Thank you. I'd like to open it up to all of you who are here today. If you want to get something to drink, a little bit of water or whatever, go for it. And then let's open it up for toasts and remarks. And if you would like to say something, feel free. You don't have to come up here. We can hear you. And I want to thank you all for coming very much.
So, yeah, I should have written stuff down. Laura's probably kicking me for it. It's like, yeah. Francois and I really connected when I started making movies. He would come along and take photos of the weird people I'd find making films. I remember one time I was doing a movie called Peyote Jesus, and we had the whole Last Supper scene lined up, and we actually went out and rounded up people from the street because we didn't have enough actors. And I remember one of them said to Francois, he's like, if you point that camera at me again, I'm going to, whatever. And I was like, we're making a movie here. I mean, we're pointing a camera at you at 24 frames a second. But yeah, he really, we connected on that. And I wrote my first movie and showed it to Francois. And maybe he wasn't the brutal teacher that he was with other people. He took about 2.5 hours beating around the bush to basically tell me to throw it away and start over. So, but we worked on a lot together. That he helped me on that film, and then we made another film that Rob had written. I just loved it. I read it because you had sent it to Francois, and the second I was done, I'm like, do you think Rob will let us film this? So we always talked about doing another movie that we didn't really get together with it. And originally it was called Looking for Goldman. It was kind of a surreal movie, which, had a French ending like so much other stuff. I remember just a funny conversation because we would always talk about what we're going to put into the movie and what we're going to do. And the movie, I want to begin with our main character, stepping onto tracks up here by the university, and he steps into a train car that's full of Palestinians. And my dad says to me, where are you going to get the Palestinians? And I just looked and I said, let me worry about the Palestinians. What I really meant was let me worry about the extras, but it came out that way and it was funny. But yeah, I jokingly said right after Dad died that, you never taught me French. Joke, because, I could have learned it too, but no, he taught me construction, and that was a big thing. And every time I'm building something, I think of my dad. We put so much cedar into his house that every time I smell cedar, I think of my dad. So smells are a big memory trigger. And my mom was an Army nurse, so I moved around a lot, and it was great to have my dad's house was an anchor here in Salt Lake. He lived there for so long, had the same number for 30 years or something, Can't remember my passwords, but I can still remember that phone number. So anyway, we did a lot of fun stuff together. We started some documentaries. It was so great to just see my dad just dive in and believe in what I was doing. He looked at me and he said, I can join in on this and we can have fun with it, and that was great. And we had a lot of fun the summer of 2000 working with Rob and making this wonderful movie. And I'll never forget that. I've got to find some outtakes. There's a great one where one of the cameras is just focusing on nothing out at teddy bears, which you saw some of these pictures here. And then the other camera is on the dolly. And so this dolly comes just rolling through this red umbrella. Francois is there with the camera. David's there with the mic, and it just comes rolling right through the scene. But yeah, we had a lot of time together. It was hard those last years to watch Francois go downhill, because it wasn't as hard with the physical stuff, but my dad to me was just this intellectual giant. And to see him lose memory, to see him, that was the hardest. Anyway, I miss my dad, and I know I'm going to miss him for the rest of my life. Thanks.
It's really amazing to be in a room where I'm seeing 3 generations of people who look like Francois, which is not something I would ever have predicted or even thought of happening. I'm Kate Coles. I was first a student of Francois when I was a poet in the PhD program here many years ago, when poets didn't take fiction classes and fiction writers didn't take poetry classes. That's changed. My dissertation advisor, Mark Strand, was furious that I was taking a fiction class, wasting my time on that. But Francois was a really wonderful teacher for me. He was thoughtful. He said to me when he accused me of having written down something that had actually happened to me, I said, "Francois, this is fiction." And he said, "You're a poet, it's all psychic autobiography for you," which was true. The other thing that I'm really delighted about being in this room is that I'm in a room full of people who were students of both mine and Francois, because I came back here to the University of Utah to teach before he retired, to teach alongside him. And Shelley, in fact, was a student of mine briefly, maybe before you were a student of Francois. And I think I remember encouraging you to continue and to take those classes from, I wasn't a real professor then, so to take classes from the real people. But I'm looking at Rachel and Nicole, who were both students of mine and students of Francois, and thinking, as I think about the genetics in the room, of this other kind of genetics, which is the transmission of language, the transmission of ways of thinking. And I'm feeling here as if that's another sense in which Francois is always going to be with all of us here. So thank you, Shelley, for everything.
Because you haven't done nothing, baby, but drove a good man from home.
When the moon peaks over the mountain, little girl, I'll be on my way. I'm gonna roll the highway until the break of day. Just before I go, 'cause when I leave this time, little girl, I won't be back no more. I got the key.
I got the key
to the highway.
To the highway.
Built out and bound to go.
gotta go, I gotta
I'm
go.
gonna leave heaven, walk in his bones.